Guilty Gear Strive Season 4 is officially upon us with the release of patch 1.40, and it's a very substantial patch. Several characters have effectively been reworked to have entirely new behaving kits to them, or have their overall game plan flow completely differently from what it used to before. There's very few system mechanic changes, so I'm going to go ahead and mention them at the start of this video once I get past introducing how this format is going to work. I have two versions of the game. When we're on the Wasteland map that we see right here, we're going to be talking about the previous version of Guilty Gear Strive. For example, this is a change that is going to be related to Soul Badguy. In the old patch, you could get a clean hit of Heavy Volcanic Viper, and it wouldn't instantly break the wall.
Volcanic Viper!
Meanwhile, when we are on the Silver Castle map, we'll be talking about the version 1.40, the current Season 4 patch version. As to demonstrate this, I'll show what happens now when you get a clean hit Volcanic Viper with Soul Badguy. The wall has full HP.
Volcanic Viper!
As you can see, one of the changes to Soul Badguy is that now Heavy Volcanic Viper instantly breaks the wall. I'll talk about the implications of this later when I go through the patch notes themselves. While there's no universal system mechanic changes per se in this patch, there are some universal things that have been done across the board to the entire cast to try and push the game in a direction that Arc System Works thinks is beneficial. They've increased defense across the board while reducing some damage in cases, but also try to preserve high damage characters by increasing their damage to offset the changes to health. In addition to that, they've also tried to reduce the power of some potent 6Ps within the game itself to make them less strong of options that some characters could readily spam or use to check various situations. As the adjustments themselves are a little different across each character, we'll simply explore those changes when we get to them. For now, let's go ahead and start with this particular video and discuss the changes to Soul Badguy, a character who is heavily reworked in this version of the game. Soul Badguy now takes less damage because he has a decreased defense modifier value. This is a fairly simple number where basically an assigned attack has a set value of damage, but then it's multiplied by a character's defense modifier value. Most of the casts have modifiers below 1, so this reduces the damage that a character takes. I'm not going to be able to present the specific numbers between the two versions in this video example, so instead my way of demonstrating this will simply be to demonstrate two very simple combos and compare the damage. This is the old version of the game. This 3-hit sequence against Soul Badguy did 103 damage before. This is how much damage this sequence does in the current version of the game. 98 damage, so a loss of 5 damage overall for Soul Badguy. Most of the casts have received some similar changes like this, and I'm not going to be able to really break down like the entire consequences of this, but effectively, because of these shifts in value, in terms of damage that characters are receiving, it should slow down the pace of the game overall and allow more interactions so that a person doesn't just get Vortex to death and can have some more health to leverage their way out of some situations. We'll see how everything breaks down, and I'm definitely not going to be able to portray the full entire picture right here, but games should feel like there's more chances for a player to take some offense and then be able to escape overall. I'm going to be demonstrating this sequence pretty much with the same example, so we'll always use Kai's Close Slash, Far Slash, and Heavy Slash, and compare the damages between the two versions as we go through the entire cast, just to keep things consistent. And we'll see overall how things are going to be feeling. These small numbers do add up over time and can result in basically an entire combo's worth of damage, or entire hits or sequences of damage, feeling like they were removed from the game, as it were, in order to increase the health value of characters. Let's start going over Soul Badguy specific changes now. 6P has increased recovery. To best demonstrate this, I'm going to go ahead and edit this in post and show the two new 6P's recovery side by side. I think that this is fairly noticeable for Soul Badguy in particular, and this is a 6P that I think was pretty good because Soul could pretty much throw this out as a low commitment anti-poke option to deal with an opponent's head style attacks. 6P also received another nerf. Before, if you got a grounded counter hit on the opponent, you got a full launch on them, which opened up some pretty dynamic combo routing for Soul Badguy. This is a very simple example of what you could do in the corner with Soul. Now, you no longer launch the opponent on grounded counter hit. As you might imagine, this significantly reduces the amount of damage that Soul Badguy is able to get without dedicating resources to a successful hit of this move. That being said, he does have some new cancels that are able to basically make up for like the combo routing nerfs. You basically see that he has to do new combo routes that do less damage than before because he's not going to be able to get free clean hit Volcanic Vipers. In this one example alone, without even considering the fact that Kai Kisuke has an increased defense modifier value, we lost about 40 damage for Soul Badguy in this sequence. 5K has had aspects of it buffed and nerfed, so let's go ahead and break these down. The first hit of 5K has received a nerf where it now has slower startup. Before, it was 3-frame startup, which meant that Soul Badguy had access to one of 2 3-frame normals that existed in the old version of the game. And such, characters that use a -3 option could actually be punished by Soul Badguy. This is a very strong normal and one that many people had various complaints about because it was a great mashing option for Soul Badguy to use, as well as a decent anti-air option to lead to some high damage conversions that a good Soul player could execute pretty consistently. Now, the startup has been increased, so it comes out around frame 5 if I have the correct information. This basically means that characters who before had to be careful about using their -3 options against Soul Badguy in particular no longer have to worry about that. It also means that it's a less reliable mashing tool for Soul Badguy to use and will sometimes be less consistent at anti-airing the opponent on a jump-in. So overall, this part of Soul's kit is nerfed. It's still a good normal, and it has increased hitbox and hurtboxes as well, to allow it to be able to have a little bit more range in some of these situations, while also meaning that because of the expanded hurt box, it should be able to be whiff punished a little easier. One last thing to mention with the first hit of Soul Badguy's 5K is that there's decreased knockback on it now, probably meaning that it's able to more reliably combo into the second hit of it and might have some slight adjustments to his combo routes. It's going to be hard to determine which of the changes to Soul Badguy's 5K are going to be responsible for changes to his combo routes, because after all, since it's now 2 frames slower, it's going to be hard to link into at some points in time. But you should be able to more reliably, when you do link into it, get the second hit of it, or potentially even be in ranges where you can get into some combo routing like landing a clean hit heavy Volcanic Viper or some of other of Soul Badguy's particular new cancels that he can do. We'll see overall, but I had to mention this here as well. As compensation, the second hit of 5K has a little bit of a buff to it, actually. In the previous version of the game, its attack level had been lowered by several patches ago, so that if you got a hit on a standing opponent, you were not able to combo into 6S on a standing opponent. Since they reduced the startup of 5K's first hit, it feels like that ArcSys wanted to give this functionality back to Soul Badguy, since it was a nerf to a 3-frame normal. With this being a 5-frame normal, it seems like they deemed that, okay, if you're able to actually hit this against a standing opponent, you deserve to get some of your stronger 6X conversions at all times back. Before, this relied on either like a counter hit on the opponent or for them to be in a crouching state. So this is a nice quality of life buff for Soul Badguy, but don't get me wrong, he is going to be missing the fact that he lost his 3-frame normal. Let's get on to the next normal that Soul Badguy had adjusted, his 6 Heavy Slash. There's increased recovery to it now, and just like with the 6P change, I'm going to try to put these side by side so we can appreciate the difference. As you can see, it's a pretty dramatic difference how much recovery has been added to this move overall, meaning that it should be easier for an opponent to whiff punish this, so Soul Badguy has to be far more careful with when he throws out this move. Another change of 6S has been made to its blowback, where there's been a slight adjustment to the opponent's falling speed so that he's able to more reliably set up a new mechanic he has with his special move, Fafnir. But I'll go ahead and talk about that a little bit later. Basically, it's a change that's going to be existing to have the new combo routing that Soul has access to a little more consistent and reliable. So not really much of a point of demonstrating it. The next normal to talk about is Standing Heavy Slash, which had its blowback on hit decreased, meaning that Soul Badguy is not going to be able to launch the opponent as far as he did before. So, I have a very simple demonstration to how to compare these two. This is what the old version of the game would look like in terms of his blowback. The opponent was almost pushed a full screen away. As you can see, it takes about 6 6S's in order to reach before. This is what the new blowback looks like. As you can see, the enemy is not quite pushed to full screen. And even then, it takes me half the number of 6S's in order to reach them, so I think it's a fairly substantial difference. Practically speaking, this means that Soul Badguy has to be closer to the corner in order to use 5H as a wall bounce launching tool for him to get his higher damage and combo routes near the corner. For example, in the current version of the game, if you backdash 3 spaces away from the corner, you're not able to get corner combo routes like this. As you can see here, Kai doesn't hit the wall. Compare that to before. A pretty substantial difference if you ask me. Jump Dust also had a reduction to its horizontal blowback, making it more difficult for Soul Badguy to get high damaging corner combo routes when he's closer to the mid-screen position. Compare that to now. As you can see, Kai Kisuke is dramatically lower to the ground than he was in the previous version of the game, which means that Soul Badguy will have a harder time actually linking in high damage normals off of sequences like this now. Soul Badguy's Gunflame also sees a small nerf that I don't think is going to matter a whole lot. The latter half of the active frames have reduced damage now. Between the two versions, it's going to be a little hard to actually calculate because characters, like Kai Kisuke here, also have their defense modifier lowered so that they take less damage as well overall. So, for example, in the old patch, at point-blank range, Kai Kisuke would take 40 damage from Gunflame. Meanwhile, at range, where the latter half of the active frames are in play, Kai Kisuke would instead take 30 damage. Let's compare this to the current version of the game. Because of Kai Kisuke's new defense modifier value, Gunflame at point-blank range now does 2 damage less. This is not a nerf to Gunflame itself, it's simply a change of the entire cast. But when we get at range, Gunflame now does 23 damage instead of 30 damage, so a loss of 7 damage in total. So maybe the attack itself lost about 5 damage. The math is going to be a little more complex than that as well. So if anyone has those numbers on hand and wants to share in the comments section, do let us know. But this is simply a good demonstration for how much damage that Gunflame at maximum range, or in situations where you're getting a late-hitting Gunflame and maybe some combo routing you can do. This is a good example of those cases at the very least. Let's get into the next special move to talk about with Soul Badguy in the patch notes, Volcanic Viper. All versions now have an expanded upper hitbox for the latter half of its active frames. Arc Systems said in the patch notes themselves that this is supposed to make it easier for Soul Badguy to follow up on incredibly high wall sticks. I haven't been able to find a practical example of this that's going to show up in a match, but I suppose you can just more reliably use either Volcanic Viper to trigger a wall stick if you're worried about actually being able to reach the opponent in time. Now for a DP change I can actually demonstrate and talk about, and in fact, I've already demonstrated it earlier, but now let's get into it. When you're near the corner with Soul Badguy in the previous patch, he was an immensely high damage character because of his ability to effectively add 2, sometimes even 3, clean hit heavy Volcanic Vipers in his combo routing. Without getting into it really, because some of these combos were incredibly technical that required very specific height manipulations on the opponent's character, Soul Badguy could delete characters if he got the right hit, especially after he cranked a little bit of risk gauge. Arc System Works decided to target this aspect of the character in the current patch by making it so that when you're now near the corner, if you get a clean hit near that corner, you instantly get a wall stick. This is a full health wall. Just to demonstrate. This completely changes Soul Badguy's corner combo routing entirely, because now, instead of trying to optimize routes to get as many clean hits as possible, you're going to be using clean hit as a way to end your combos and get the wall stick overall. This shouldn't mean that Soul Badguy's damage near the corner is going to be significantly reduced, but he has some new tools to play with as well, which we're going to get into in a couple of changes. Keep in mind that changes specifically when clean hit hits near the corner. In mid-screen, it doesn't have any new behaviors when it interacts with the wall, so you're going to be able to use clean hit DPs as mid-screen combo enders that do high damage and give a hard knockdown, and then be able to run your offense like normal. As you can see, the wall health is still very much intact after I use a clean hit in mid-screen. Now for another significant nerf, which has implications for Soul Badguy's neutral as well as his combo routing in general. The first hit of Bandit Revolver in the previous patch had fairly quick recovery. As you can see, Soul Badguy basically landed and was able to jump instantly. This was massive because it meant that he had a fairly non-committal way to approach from neutral, and once he had bar, he was able to go into this and then threaten high-low 50-50s off of this as well, while being relatively safe. Near the corner as well, he was able to use this move as a means to set up some pretty high damaging combo routes. That in conjunction with the 3-frame 5K meant that Soul Badguy had some pretty easy combo routing that option selected. If you got hit, you got comboed. If you blocked, and he had meter, you were put into a mix-up situation. Let's take a look at the new recovery of the first swing of Bandit Revolver. As you can see, Soul Badguy is in place for quite some time actually, and this has a lot of implications. For starters, this means that this is a little more risky for Soul Badguy to try to approach with in a failure state, because if it whiffs, the opponent actually has a decent chance of whiff punishing it. Furthermore, if you go for combos with this in the corner, all of your old routing that would rely on you launching the opponent, then doing Bandit Revolver, landing, and going into 5k, which don't forget, the startup of that has also been reduced, basically don't work anymore. Soul Badguy's combo routing has to be completely reworked, but luckily Arc System Works has given us some new cancels as Soul players to work with, but we'll see overall how this impacts Soul Badguy. One other aspect that this changes about Soul Badguy is that now he's no longer going to be able to force RPS situations weighted in his favor if you block the first hit of Bandit Revolver when he has meter. Bandit Revolver is still good for setting up true high-low 50-50s with an RC. However, at times, once you hit this 50% tension gauge against a good player who would respect this, you could effectively steal your turn back because of the fast recovery that the first hit had before. However, now it should be more consistent for the opponent to recognize that you didn't cancel and punish you for landing in the first place. Compare that to before. Almost the moment I land, I was able to press 2K into 2D, thus making it so that if the opponent was slow on their reactions, which was arguably fair because they're looking for me to do the second hit of Bandit Revolver, they're looking for me to RC the hit of Bandit Revolver to set up the 50-50, I could then steal my turn back and catch them maybe with a free low or run up throw or anything of the sort. Now, it should be more reliable for the opponent to recognize that Soul Badguy didn't do any of these follow-ups and actively take their turn, thus nerfing this option as an offensive mix-up tool for Soul Badguy to use once he has 50% tension. Bandit Bringer has several changes, both to the grounded version and the air version, so let's start off with the universal changes to both versions of the move. There's increased damage to these moves. So, before, this is what the damage would look like against a full health Kai. 50 damage. This is the new damage. 57, and keep in mind that Kai's defense modifier was decreased, so he is actively taking less damage as well from this attack in the first place. There's a couple of changes as well to make this a little more combo-friendly for Soul Badguy. There's a higher ground bounce, even though it has faster falling speed, as well as increased attack level, meaning that the overall hit stop has also been increased for Soul Badguy as well. Let's compare the two situations. In the old patch, this is what the hit would look like. As you can see, the dummy pretty much fell immediately to the ground, and we were fairly close to Soul. This is the new version. A substantially higher ground bounce overall, and the dummy is placed a little farther away from Soul Badguy as well. These changes mean that it should be a little easier for Soul Badguy to combo into. So, for example, you're able to link the first hit of the 3-frame 5K in the previous patch before, but now you're actually able to link in other moves as well. You can do a slow cancel like that and the dummy will be popped up into your jump heavy, whereas before, the dummy was pretty much instantly grounded. So there's something to experiment here when it comes to converting off of this situation, as opposed to just doing a pretty bog standard straight down RC to actually catch the opponent and then run up and combo. Another significant change to Bandit Bringer is the fact that upon landing, Soul will now deaccelerate while moving forward. This is what it looked like in the old version. As you can see, Soul was spaced out quite a bit of ways away from Kai. This is how it looks in the current version. As you can see, he's much closer to Kai Kisuke right now, and this subtle difference can have a large amount of impact on terms of what RPS situation Soul Badguy is able to force. Soul Badguy would often like to backdash in this situation to try and invade the opponent's attack, and because of the ranging space before, oftentimes the opponent would get a far-reaching normal, or like the far version of far slash, in order to catch this backdash, meaning that they didn't really have access to high damage sequences here. As you can see before, Kai Kisuke pressing slash would get far slash in this situation, and unless Kai had resources and instantly committed to a far slash RC or far slash wild assault, he would not really get a substantial punish onto Soul Badguy here. With this small adjustment, the situation completely changes because now Soul Badguy is actually in range for Kai Kisuke's close slash instead of far slash after a backdash. And as you can see, it catches. So that means that Kai is able to actually take his turn back with his close slash normal here and threaten Soul Badguy with a close slash starter that is going to be able to simply be 2-hit confirmed depending on the cancels that Kai wants to go for. This changes the RPS situation from being one where Soul Badguy was able to reasonably kind of force his way back in, either by doing a DP if you wanted to risk pressing against the opponent, or being able to backdash and thus create a situation where the opponent went for a fast jab normal, that would whiff, and Soul basically got his turn back for free. Or jumping back, and if the opponent called out that jump back, would be able to swing and only take a poke's worth of damage pretty consistently without a heavy commitment from the opponent. Now, the opponent is able to go for even more rewarding starters to take their turn back, and Soul Badguy puts himself at much more risk by trying to cheese his way out of a situation where he's negative in. So we're going to see how often Soul Badguy actually wants to backdash from a Bandit Bringer now. Of course, this also means that a good Soul player is able to space this option out is going to be more rewarded for it. As you can see, a lower hit basically means that Soul Badguy is able to disengage for free. But up close, even in mid-screen, this RPS is going to happen. So I think this is a fairly healthy change overall, as it turns what once was a belligerent option for Soul Badguy to throw out in order to cheese his way back into stealing turns that the opponent had to guess RPS on. If Soul misspaces this, he's going to lose his turn pretty consistently now. There were two changes to grounded Bandit Bringer, and that's going to be increased land and recovery, which again leads into the differences of RPS situations, because now Soul is going to be a lot more negative or comparably negative, because don't forget, the attack level of the move has been increased, which means that there's more blocks done as well as hits done to the move as well. So this could be there just to make sure that the same amount of negative frames is in place. Someone's going to have to measure these out and actually give me confirmation. So if you can do that and post it in the chat before, we'd all appreciate it here. The other thing too as well is that there's decreased wall break value gains, so that if you use this move in combos, you're not going to be breaking the wall as much as before, which again, I think Soul Badguy's entire combo routing near the corner is going to be dramatically changed, so he could arguably appreciate this depending on what Soul players are going to be cooking up over the next couple of weeks. The aerial version of Bandit Bringer has a combination of nerfs and buffs. For starters, in the previous version of the game, Soul Badguy could choose whether or not he held the input to mess up with his jumping timing. That was uncharged. And that was charged. Basically, Soul Badguy could use this to RPS his way through neutral and try and bait out the opponent's anti-air attempt. In the current version of the game, Soul Badguy can no longer hold the input to change the timing. This means that the opponent no longer has to guess between which version of Bandit Bringer Soul is trying to use to get in. They see Bandit Bringer, they have a specific timing in which they can react to it. In addition to this, they've also decreased its land and recovery, meaning that it's safer overall, and they decreased the knockback, which probably means that in combos, it could be easier for Soul Badguy to RC and pick up combos that weren't available before, but on block, it means that the opponent's going to be a little closer to Soul Badguy as well. As you can see, my jump gets caught by this far slash from Kai Kisuke in the old version of the game on block. Here's what the new recovery looks like. I'm actually able to cleanly jump over this far slash attempt from Kai Kisuke. So this move is a little bit safer, and you'll also notice how much closer I am to Kai overall. There's tons of other changes to the movement property of aerial Bandit Bringer as well. Namely, it's more susceptible to horizontal momentum regardless of which way Soul was moving before. The falling speed no longer changes depending on its height. There's increased upward movement before the attack starts up, and there's the attack startup movement speed has been consolidated as well.
Bandit Bringer! Bandit Bringer! Bandit Bringer! Bandit Bringer!
This basically just changes how various ways of the move would behave before in ways that I'm not going to be able to completely dissect right now for the sake of the video, and it's something that Soul Badguy players are going to have to explore with the implications of going forward. But I wanted to highlight this out just in case anyone pointed out that I didn't mention the momentum changes before. On to the next special move, Wild Throw. It has a very simple change where it does increased damage, probably in a way to make sure that it's still a viable option for Soul Badguy to go for in a game where everybody's health got increased. This is the damage in the old patch. 100 on Kai Kisuke. This is the new damage. 123, and again, keep in mind the fact that Kai Kisuke has a lower defense modifier, so he's tankier than he was in the previous version. Now it's time to talk about two buffs to Soul Badguy, with basically two of his moves being largely reworked to help him have access to his combo routes now that some of his old routing has been gutted. And that is going to be to Night Raid Vortex and to Fafnir. Both these moves can now be canceled into from normals. At an initial glance, Night Raid Vortex seems like a decent alternative as a launch option compared to Bandit Revolver. As you can see here, Fafnir is also going to be able to combo it into, but the situations where you're going to be using it, I think, are going to be largely consistent with an airborne opponent for reasons I'll get into once we start talking about Fafnir properly. We have to talk about Night Raid Vortex's functionality changes as well, outside of the fact you can now cancel into it. there's a lot of things going on right here, namely the fact that the startup for the fully charged version has been decreased. In addition to that, the movement speed of the startup has increased forward momentum, but then Soul Badguy decelerates. Before, you could use Night Raid Vortex as a low profiling option to try and skip neutral against an opponent trying to zone you. As you can see right here. And before, a fully charged hit of this Night Raid Vortex did 55 damage. With the decreased startup of the fully charged version, as well as the fact that Soul Badguy now deaccelerates, the range of this move has effectively been gutted by half. This is me fully holding down the move itself, so now you can no longer use this as a YOLO get-in option for Soul Badguy to try to low profile against the opponent's fireballs. This basically has been reworked so that it's now a proper combo launcher for Soul Badguy to rely on, and falls in line with the outline that Arc System Works gave for Soul Badguy, where they wanted his full-screen presence to be weak, but his mid-screen presence to be strong. There's some other changes as well to Night Raid Vortex, just to make sure that the move isn't going to be incredibly too powerful for Soul as a combo tool now. Before, this was the damage that the uncharged version of the move did. As you can see, the opponent was launched fairly high. The move did 45 damage against a full health Kai Kisuke, and it led to a hard knockdown. Now to look how the current uncharged version behaves. As you can see, the opponent techs out of it on landing, so no longer leads to a hard knockdown, which isn't too big of a deal because usually you're going to be using this to extend combos anyway. Additionally, the move does less damage. We can probably guess the move itself lost 5 damage, and then Kai's defense modifier shaves off another 2 damage, so instead of doing 45 damage, the move now does 38 damage overall in this situation. So we'll see overall how this kind of plans some things out. It is still possible for you to combo off of this. Keep in mind, that's a 5-frame startup 5K that we're working with as well, so you shouldn't be really feeling the effects of the lack of hard knockdown too often here, but it's something different. Let's take a look at the fully charged versions of effects before. The opponent was launched pretty high, and the move itself did 55 damage, but it had incredibly slow startup, again, because this was in keeping in mind that you would use this move from full screen to traverse the entire screen itself. And because you could cancel into this, there wasn't really much combo utility Soul Badguy had, except off of particular heavy counter hits that he would get in the previous patch. Now for the new version of the fully charged one. It comes out faster, meaning it's more likely to be able to fit into some of Soul Badguy's combo routing, which he's going to appreciate considering the fact that Bandit Revolver lost a lot of its combo utility. In addition to that, there's also slightly more damage that it does, and a slightly higher knockup as well. We can see here that the move itself did 57 damage, so 2 more damage total against a tankier Kai. And as I failed to demonstrate in that example, you are able to still link a close slash on an airborne opponent, which means that Soul Badguy gets some pretty good combo routing off of this. There was some speculation as to whether or not Soul was going to be able to as consistently low profile some of the opponent's options with this move, since that a lot of the startup and various properties have been changed with it. To me, it feels pretty much about the same as before, but there's probably a lot of deep testing that's going to actually confirm that it certainly could be worse at going underneath some moves. As you can see on a pretty quick read, you are still able to do this against Kai's Far Slash. There's a lot more to test with it here though, so I'm not going to draw any conclusions just yet. Before we talk about the new changes to Fafnir, which have already shown off that you can cancel it, we have to look at how the move was pretty much used before. It led to some decent combo routing on hit, but more importantly, this was Soul Badguy's Guard Crush. While he couldn't cancel into this move, he could basically use it as a way to close the gap and reset pressure. This could be sometimes effective as a means to contest through neutral, especially when you use a proper car cancel. So you could jump scare, be incredibly plus on block against the opponent, and run some offense, all the while threatening some chip damage. However, now that you can cancel into it from normals, if you retain this property as being a Guard Crush move, this would actually be broken for Soul Badguy, as he could basically threaten to loop a Guard Crushing move off of his normals. So, through various changes, like decreasing the startup, increasing its active frames, while increasing its recovery, this no longer also Guard Crushes. Because of this, Soul Badguy is actually negative on block. I was mashing 5P there. Because of its seldom use cases as a pressure tool, it had some strong properties on hit in the old version to make sure that if the opponent messed up and somehow got hit by this, you're able to get some combos in certain situations. A lot of this was due to the fact that Fafnir would cause a ground bounce on the opponent. As you can see, Kai goes down and then up into a hard knockdown state. Now, Fafnir no longer ground bounces. Instead, as you can see, the opponent is sent flying completely straight back. However, this is all because this is like the now sour hit, if you will, of Fafnir, because there's a new clean hit that you can set up into that leads to some new combo extensions. The properties for the clean hit trigger when the opponent is at a certain height off of the ground against Soul Badguy. So, some combo strings that you'll be able to do with this are going to require a couple of delays, it feels like. That was not a clean hit. Meanwhile, as we saw there, that was a clean hit, which as we can see near the corner, it causes a wall bounce actually to happen that Soul Badguy is able to link a close slash into. I imagine that this is going to be part of Soul Badguy's new combo routing near the corner to make up for his loss of basically doing several heavy Volcanic Viper clean hits. It's also possible to set up a clean hit in mid-screen with Fafnir. However, you don't get a wall bounce in mid-screen. You can tell that was a clean hit because of the extended hit stop that was happening on the move right there. So I feel like this is going to be something where it's going to largely have most of its utility within the corner itself. There's a lot of other changes as well to make Fafnir more of a friendly combo tool for Soul, since that's what it is now instead of a pressure tool. There's decreased risk level depletion, decreased combo blowback duration, as well as having decreased blowback duration when it starts off with a combo hit. Additionally, now there's a lower hurt box to it, so there's not going to be as many situations where the opponent's going to be able to low profile this attack. Before, as you can see, Faust was able to crawl under the guard crush. In the current version of the game, this is how it looks. Faust is no longer able to crawl under this move. However, because of the fact that, it's now negative on block, a little less scary to consider. Tyrant Rave has a few adjustments to make the clean hit slightly more rewarding, I think, than it was before, especially when compared to the standard hit, as well as making it more easily visually confirmable when you actually got the clean hit. So, let's start with how it looked before. This is a clean hit Tyrant Rave. Bonus. 208 damage. If you walk back a little bit before, Soul Badguy would be out of range for this clean hit. Bonus. As you can see, it was 180 damage, but visually speaking, it looked very comparable to a non-clean hit version of the move, making it a little obtuse to realize when you actually got this to hit. Now let's compare that to what a clean hit looks like in the current patch. There's a little more hit stop on the second hit, and we can see that we got the clean hit with the damage. With all the damage adjustments going on, it seems like the clean hit Tyrant Rave only lost a single point of damage. If I walk back to try and get a non-clean hit, we can see that we now do 171 damage, so we lost about 8 damage in total compared to the previous version of the game, with all the adjustments to the damage of the move as well as to Kai's damage modifier. Additionally, we can see a very key difference where there's not like this cool little rainbow particle effect on the clean hit version. The range for the clean hit has also been expanded horizontally, while the height requirement for it has been decreased. A non-clean hit. And a clean hit. It's nice to have this visual confirmation to let the player know that, hey, you actually got the higher damage version of the super move. The last change to explore with Soul Badguy is to his heavy Mob Cemetary Super, a largely useless super move when it came to high-level play. It was a command throw super that you could jump after the super flash that was able to do quite a bit of damage and only cost 50% tension gauge. It had some armor as well, but because of the way it interacted, the move would slow down, meaning the opponent could potentially have time to react and save themselves on an RC cancel in order to escape this move. It was incredibly useless before. It also had no combo utility because you weren't able to combo into this throw. After all these years, Heavy Mob Cemetary might actually have a use in Soul Badguy's kit, not as a gimmicky command throw that has very limited use cases, but as a high-damage super alternative to Tyrant Rave when he has access to it. The move now costs 100% tension gauge. It can be canceled into after using a normal move as opposed to having to get a manual cancel through, and it can now grab opponents who are in hit stun. This, and alongside its reduced startup as well as increased damage, means that it basically functions as a last horizon alternative for Soul Badguy to use within his combo kit that does quite a bit of damage compared to just using Tyrant Rave. This is a very simple demonstration of what Soul Badguy can potentially use with this super move. Once you optimize some of the new Soul Badguy combo routes, I'm very interested to see what damage that he can actually do. I think it's a fun way of keeping Soul Badguy's high damage identity a little bit intact, but definitely a lot more gated off and safe for special occasions when you actually have access to the super, as opposed to the very easy access he had to multiple clean hit Volcanic Vipers in the previous patch. To get an idea of how much more damage that this new heavy Mob Cemetary can do in combos, let's compare two combo routes. Clean hit Tyrant Rave does 248 damage. Now for heavy Mob Cemetary. $257 damage in this particular case. I think it's very hard to really determine where Soul Badguy falls in this patch because there's so much that's changed with the character. You might as well consider him almost a completely different character in this patch, just with how all of his moves have been changed in general. He has certainly lost a lot of things. He lost his 3-frame normal, which means that his challenges against the opponent's offense isn't going to be as effective as it was before, and he's in that way a lot more normalized across with the cast. His combo routing theory, specifically in the corner, has to be completely reworked to take it into consideration that he no longer is able to loop clean hitting DPs in the corner, but instead has to look into doing routes that rely on raid Vortex as well as Fafnir and that clean hit in order to get his damage before. Also, he's lost a lot of the RPS situations that he was able to abuse in order to continually take over his turn and keep the opponent in a frustrating guessing game as to what Soul Badguy was going to leverage next. This is with specific regards to the changes to his Bandit Revolver and to his Bandit Bringer. So there's a lot of less guesswork that has to go into fighting against Soul Badguy from neutral situations and from RPS situations. So he's more reliant on actually running his offensive game plan, using close slash and far slash, as well as his normals, and etc. in order to actually get his reward on the opponent. The full change of the cast as well being slightly tankier means that he's probably not going to be able to two-touch the cast anymore, bringing him in line to actually having more interactions with the opponent is going to be able to try and take advantage of in order to stay within the game itself. For all the nerfs that he has received, though, there are some changes that have happened to try and compensate for those. Like the changes to Fafnir making it a combo tool, the changes to Raid Vortex to making it a combo tool. It's certainly clear that Soul has a more defined archetype as opposed to being an impressive all-rounder with access to, answers for every situation, to being more of that close-range brawler that I think Arc System Works is trying to put him into. I don't know where he's going to fall up. I do think that with what he's lost overall, there's going to be a lot of situations in which he is, in fact, worse in, but there's a lot to explore with the character as well that could potentially make up for it or keep him on a similar power level before. Still, though, I think it's safe to say he is slightly worse in a lot of common situations that he liked to play around than he was before. And so now players that relied on using those situations in order to get their victories are going to have to rework their approach with Soul Badguy from the ground up. We'll see where he falls in terms of the entire patch as well, because a lot of other characters have received various other changes, but I don't think it's so clear cut and dry as to where Soul ends up within the tier list. I do think that somewhere around possibly high mid tier to low high tier is probably where we're going to see Soul Badguy end up after everything is said and done, but we'll see how it branches out and how it develops going forward.